Go live. Okay.
Something's humming really loud.
Something's humming very loud?
Yeah. Oh, wait, now it's gone.
All right.
All right. I don't know what that was.
Private chat. No comments. Invite.
So how's your day going?
My evening
Well.
just started. I just had the Shabbat. So,
Yeah, I was thinking that because I was like, wait, isn't it Saturday? And then I remembered you're like 6 hours ahead. So
yeah, disconnected.
Oh yeah, so Jacob won't be joining us. Ha.
Jacob will not be joining us today.
Or we'll tell on him to God.
First of all, thanks again for a lovely conversation last time.
Oh, you as well. Thank you, man. That was great. Yeah, it was great to talk to you. Get to know you a little more.
So the day was very relaxed. We had just generally speaking on Shabbat. That's when like a lot of the socialization happens like during the week. So we had like couple friends over. So there was like around like 15 kids in the house. It's a lot of people, but it's all nice. So it's usually long meals. So the meal starts at 12. At around 4:00, we went to the park with all the kids. But until then, it was just at the house, and just lovely conversations going on. I'm a little bit of a stickler at the Shabbat table to try to not talk about weekday things. Just don't talk to me about. You can talk about money, but don't bring the week in yet. Just like let's be here. Like I'm down to talk about something that's happening next week with someone, and like we could discuss it, but not to be like, don't plan for Saturday night. That's eternity away. Right now we're here. So that has to do with a lot of the sort of like the framing around, but it's lovely. It's a lovely magical time. That's
cool. So no small talk. Is that what the?
No. There's.
I'm just kidding.
There's there's small talk. Just kidding. Jason's mentioning this just because I mentioned to Jason that I'm not so great at small talk. When I go to like a wedding or to not family events, but you meet someone, he's like, "What's up?" You're like, "Good." Then, like, should I ask a real question or do I say it and then after 3 seconds do I turn? I just like I don't know what to do. So like
Yeah, my friend. It's funny because my friend Craig, he's got a way of like. Oh, I say this about him a lot, but he's got a way of just asking these questions where like. It's just he just elevates the conversation to a whole new level. I don't know how he comes up with them too. He does it with everybody. It'll be small talk and then Craig will come in and then you're just like, oh man, where are we now? We're like in some weird drinking that cocktail you mentioned, the philosophical theological cocktail when you were trying to talk about like, I don't know, fishing or something. Yeah.
Right. But, so I think I'm very much like a buzzkill when it comes to that as well. Like I'll just be like,
well, that's good. I love it.
I was hearing the conversation Nate and you were having, and then I heard you guys were discussing the Leviathan, and I for a second I was like, I don't know if I even want to get into this. It's just like,
yeah, let's hear it. I may have some like preconceived ideas I'm bringing to it, so I might have some baggage I gotta push through, but I don't know. I'd like to hear. I love talking about the Bible. Anything about the Bible, I'm always down. So.
What is that verse though? Well, excuse me while I check this up. I know in Hebrew it would be it's in Genesis, the creation of the. Would you know a verse by heart if it's like the creation of the great whales or the great creatures?
That's Genesis. Let's see, Genesis 1:21. Is it? That's what it is in my Bible, at least.
What is it?
Genesis 1:21. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing.
1:21. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good on you. The sea creatures. So some people reference it to that. There's different references. In that reference, I believe it's that there was a male and female Leviathan, and then one is killed and salted for the world to come. later on, there's different interpretations which talk about the bull and the Leviathan that fight. They're massive, massive creatures that fight, and the righteous watch them. Battle. But ultimately speaking, it's supposed to be the divine and the earthly. The divine being the whale, the Leviathan, because this has to do with like sort of like the flood, like chaos, like the potentiality, and the bull is the earthly, or the sacred and the holy. But ultimately, it's supposed to be a merging, a unity between two of these things. When in, let's say, the divine and the earthly, the divine is supposed to, the whale kills the bull, and by that means it's elevating it to a higher status, which could then be enjoyed in the meal, could be consumed and fully embodied by the righteous. So you could only reach that level of unity between, like I said, the divine and the earthly, or sacred and holy. Sacred and nature. That's another example that the rabbis give between two of those options. There is also love and reverence. It's also used as an example of that. And these are all different concepts that seemingly are very hard to sort of meld together and sort of walk that line. However, in the world to come, we supposedly, we get to that status where we could enjoy that kind of unity. And again, the eating that is the consumption of that, or basking in that.
So the eating of it is eating the Leviathan, or is it eating both of them?
It's eating the Leviathan.
Because we are the earthly, sort of, right? Is that the
correct.
idea? Okay. That's interesting. And so the divine and the divine, sacred, and the reverential are all associated with Leviathan.
In one of the versions, the bull is nature and the Leviathan is the sacred. In a different one, it's the Leviathan is the Leviathan is love and the bull is reverence. And the other one, it's holiness and the divine, which I think also could be a sacred. But but that's if that's what I recall. That's what I recall them meaning. I mean, I'm sure we could go deeper into that, but
yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm guessing the divine. It's because you mentioned there was a feminine and a masculine Leviathan. Is the feminine, because you have the separation of the waters in Genesis too, before he creates the sea creatures. Mm-hmm. So is that the idea of the Leviathan above is kind of the divine, because it's above, the water comes from heaven, so the seed's kind of coming from heaven, the earth receives the seed, and then
I don't recall seeing it like in that vein. Let me check. Where was it? Actually, maybe a ton.
Well, there's I don't know.
Also, there's a different, which I'm saying it's you basically make like you make this hut of, like, it's sort of like you're covered, you're inside the Leviathan skin.
Okay. And that's from the consumption of it, then you kind of that causes you to take on its as a covering or something.
Okay, so where was it? It was from where was that? Right, the great. I mentioned the great. Them both the fighting, and that's okay.
What are you looking for?
Here we go. I'm looking to see where it was. I'm looking at something in Hebrew because I don't think they have a translation in English. It's supposed to be greatness. Okay, so the whale, the female and male whale are supposed to be two examples of greatness and perfection. Though this world can't contain that level of perfection. That's why there is this death of the female, and there's salting of her, which is going to be a meal for the righteous of the world to come. A perfect world will only be created in the world to come. then you would have this. The meal is supposed to be this. We have this being. The salting is supposed to be eternal, and the completion is supposed to be the feminine. And this here they mention this has to do with similar idea we see in the eternal light that's created in the first day, but we can't manage to contain the eternal light forever. So that's sort of the light we'll see in the world to come. I don't know if any of that made sense.
I'm trying to track. So you said there's a salting of the feminine one that we eat, and so the salting is kind
in
of
this specific verse. Yeah, in this
Okay, yeah.
specific verse, there's this the two whale. God made these two whales. He made female and male.
Okay.
He killed the female and salted her and put it away for the righteous in the world to come.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay, and so the male is just always going to be there, I guess. Why is it? See, the thing, I guess, where my head goes with Leviathan is to normally think of. I don't know why I had this association with the serpent, almost like even in the Garden of Eden, which is probably not correct then, right?
I actually think there might be a relation with the serpent. I think maybe in one of the battles there is maybe a snake, but I could be making that up. I don't think I am though.
Huh. But here's another question I had though. So in the consumption of the Leviathan, and then it gets transformed into outer garments, is that kind of is that correct to make that statement? Or is that not
fair to make that statement? It's
because Sherry mentioned that, and I've heard her mention that before. I think Jess mentioned it as well. And I thought they picked it up from something in Hebrew where there was the idea that the Leviathan was going to be transformed into like garments of skin or something like that.
Well, so yes, so in Hasidut, in Hasidism, they discuss this, but so sitting inside this hut is basically being fully covered with these skins.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but that is the process to get to that is through the eating of the one God offers you.
In that specific version, it's like through it's talking about there's this it's been salted and there's consumption. There's also the battle itself between the whale and the bull, which is that is the process of the elevating sort of that's happening, the nature becomes elevated or the earthly becomes elevated, and then there's the actual meal. So it could be seen as consuming and being part of it, or it could be seen as wrapped in around it.
Okay, because it'd kind of be this. That was my thought. Was it would kind of be the same thing? You'd be wrapping yourself around it in another way, because once you consume it, it gets transformed into your body and kind of becomes your.
Right. So I'm saying there's different versions that talk about it. Like some are talking about being consumed, some are talking about being wrapped around.
Okay, so what is the implications of this? What is this is just to elevate, basically all this is trying to describe the elevation of the earthly into the divine. Something like, correct. Is it something like theosis then, in a way?
Well, yes, but it's almost like, like Ragnarok, but just not like the destruction. It's just supposed to be like,
that's a great reference.
It's, when there's full orientation, because that's a later on story than the coming of the Messiah. That's later on is this Leviathan meal.
Is that the coming of the Messiah?
Yeah, that's not I'm saying, but that's really at the end of days. That's supposed to be when you get to this.
The great feast.
So I'm saying the Messiah comes and the temple's built, so to speak, and people are having a good time. They're still at that point talking about what it's going to be like, when the whale.
Oh, okay. So is this kind of a reference to Ezekiel? Sorry, I don't know why I was blanking there. In the Gog and Magog, the feast, or is that not?
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about that time. Even though Ezekiel has that massive battle, and he uses terms like that the Gentiles not going to be coming to the temple, and I spoke about this before on this channel, but like on in this little corner, how I believe that is one option of like of what the future lays out for us. And there's other prophecies that talk about redemption, which is a lot more joined together with the Gentile and the other nations of the world. So, like, I think it's sort of up to us. What is it that we want to? What is it that we would like to manifest?
That's so interesting. That's just an interesting approach to prophecy as well. Like that's one thing I've encountered where like I feel like certain scriptures in Christianity, they're on the outset, they're usually approached a lot differently. Like we would think about prophecy and it's just kind of almost inevitable, you know? It's like, oh, that's going to happen, but when you guys hear prophecy, it's more like here's an option or here's this other prophecy, and it's kind of up to us to align our will with God's will, depending on which one will come out.
There is it's in the Talmud. I was going to wing it, but I'm saying why wing it when we have such amazing tools today like the internet?
Don't do it.
Rabbi Yitzchak says a prophetic vision relating to one, and the same subject matter may appear to several prophets, but two prophets do not prophesy employing one and the same style of expression. Okay, so you could have different prophets coming around saying something. You're like, this sounds like, well, one, you could say it sounds like the exact opposite. Now, I would argue that, like, in some prophecies, you could say, like, he's coming about it from a different angle. And you'd be like, that's why this seems different. On the other hand, when things are really completely opposite, like I'm saying, if Ezekiel's saying that, the Gentile's not going to come inside, and then you have, like, other prophecies saying, like, it's going to be, like, this one big party. So I think you're talking about different options. You have also in the Gemara, in the Talmud, it also mentions, if they merit redemption through repentance and good deeds, I will hasten the coming of the Messiah. If they do not merit redemption, of the coming of the Messiah will be designated, will be prolonged. And again, that's sort of up. That has to do with us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a weird.
Also, this goes all the way back to naming of the animals. Like the creation and the fact that God said, like, let's see what's going to happen. The creation of this world itself and the seventh day, the Shabbat, God is creating every one of these days and he sees if it's good. And on the Sabbath, he rests because, it's our job is now to complete that last day. But that happens sort of together with him. So I think even as far as the prophecies go, which is unlike the Greeks' myth. The prophet's coming saying, like, listen, I'm calling out to the Israelite and I'm saying bad, a storm is brewing. Bad things are coming down. But unlike the tragic myth of the Greeks, which is inevitable, you can change this. You could, you need to repent and it can change.
Mm-hmm.
So I think also as far as Ezekiel, I don't know if I subscribe to that prophecy or that's not the one I'm trying to fulfill at least.
Okay. What is the implications of that prophecy? Is that basically describing the death of the nations or something? I never really understood what it's talking about.
Well, that's a massive battle between the other nations. And there's basically for God's name to be one, does it have to, does it ultimately, for God's name to be one, does it require bloodshed? Does it require battle? Or does it require, can we get there in a different way?
Okay. Yeah, it's just, I guess I wasn't quite sure how to take it because I read, in the book of Revelation by John, and I'm like, well, he was a Jewish person who wrote that. But he's got there's another prophecy in there that's very similar, almost exactly the same, probably taken from Ezekiel, I'm sure. And so that's why it's in my Bible, it's repeated twice. That's why I didn't know if it was, I didn't necessarily get the impression, especially when reading the book of Revelation, that it was specifically talking about the nations. I thought it was talking about some weird, strange, I thought the nations could be included in whatever Gog and Magog is, but I didn't know what it was specifically referring to. Because there's a weird part in Ezekiel too where he says right before they get in that battle, it says something like where they ask the question, are you he who God spoke about in ancient days, or something like that. And I was like, what on earth does this mean? Would that, because to me that, I don't know, my mind doesn't go to associate that with the nations, but is that normally that's associated with? I can try to find.
That's what we have it associated with. However, I could, as part of the specific verse, I could get back to you about that one. However, like in Isaiah, it's clearly talking about the man and the foreigner, and happy is the man who does this. The man who holds fast to it, who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it, and stays in his hand from doing any evil. Right, and that has to do with the man. And later on, it says, let not the foreigner say, who has attached himself to the Lord will keep me apart from his people. And let not the Enoch say, I am a withered tree. So the attitude is like, again, like there's clearly a place for the Gentile. I don't even sometimes like saying the word Gentile. Like even the word, yeah, I know. I'm saying like even the word like goy in Hebrew, or goy, really means like a nation.
Is that kind of like a derogatory term now or something?
It's how it's said.
Oh, okay, that's funny. I don't take any offense to it at all. I'm always calling myself a pagan anyway and stuff. So I'm like, it's whatever.
Well,
you can call me whatever.
I mean, a pagan is different. But
yeah, I know.
I mean,
the pagans get saved.
The Talmud says the man who denounces idol worship is called the Jew.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the pagans are pretty screwed then. Pagans ought to be like on the outside though. That's the thing. Like they're always in the woods, you know. They don't want to be in the city anyway, you know.
That's true.
I don't know where I'm going here. Anyway, so back to you mentioned you brought up this verse in, was it Isaiah? No, you were talking about Job or something. There was somewhere in Job where you were talking about Leviathan and well, I mean, I know that's where
the biggest reference is. It's like in
Grail country.
In Grail country.
Yeah.
Where is that mentioned in Job? I'll tell you where that has to do in Job. That has to do. One second.
Well, it's mentioned in Job, I think twice in Psalms, Leviathan, and then once in Isaiah, maybe more than once in Isaiah that I know of, but I don't know. If you wanted, hey, Sherry's here. She's still going.
What do you mean she's still going?
Well, she had to go earlier when she got off Grail Country, and then I thought she was busy or something, but
maybe she's just on.
She's still got some gas in the tank.
Yeah, when in Job, it's in 3rd chapter, verses 7 to 8, I think.
Okay.
You've created this Leviathan to play with.
Okay, the stars of a
Is it open
let's see,
in front
where
of
is
you?
it? Yeah, I got it right here. Job 3:8. May those curse it. Okay, I'll just talk about Job's like kind of complaining about the day he was born or something, and then he says, "Oh, may that night be barren. May no joyful shout come into it. May those curse it who curse the day." And mine says, "Those who are ready to arouse Leviathan." And I know the translations get weird in Job because I don't know. It just seems to happen.
Translation. I want to see if you don't mind. I want to just check what this translation is in. Second, let me check that out. Interesting. Sorry to those who are watching that we're doing a bit of a deep dive over here. We just got to know about this whale.
Hey, I like this stuff. It's interesting you keep calling it a whale too. I just keep thinking about Pinocchio now. I don't know.
Well, just because in Hebrew it's Leviathan, and Leviathan is a whale. It's not Leviathan is just like a translation of the Hebrew word Leviathan.
Is there a connection between Leviathan and the Book of Jonah then, in the Great Sea creature?
That's a Daga Gadol. That's like that's a large fish.
That's the god that the Philistines worshipped, right? Dagon.
I mean, yeah,
Dagon.
according to. Okay, so there's.
Don't listen to me.
Here, may those who cast spells upon thee damage those prepared to disable Leviathan. But that's one. But there's another one. 1 second. Where was this?
And Sherry said all of chapter 41 is about Leviathan as well, where it gives that detailed description of him.
About playing with. Where is he playing?
Not playing with. That's in Psalms, I think, or there you have made Leviathan to play there, or something like that. I thought that was Psalms. Maybe not. Let me look that up.
It is. It is Psalms. It is Psalms. Okay, mystery solved. So yeah. So that's right. The whale with Jonah. That, I mean, the big fish with Jonah. That's like that's already a different
thing. Let's not go there then. All right. Yeah. But Psalm, it was Psalm 104 something, somewhere in there it talks about it. And then Psalm 74 is the one where it talks about eating them. I think you broke the heads of the sea serpents in the waters. You broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and you gave him as food to the peoples inhabiting the wilderness. I don't know why I said peoples. I put an S on the end there. That's embarrassing.
I mean, there's also there, like, we pray for. I mean, there's what's called the Sukkot Shalom, like the covering of peace that we're supposed to also, that the righteous are supposed to have a meal in, and again, the meal is supposed to be like a spiritual meal, and again, this large tent is supposed to be made out of the skin as well, but they're generally usually going back to the same source. And Leviathan, again, really coming from the ocean, being a creature of the ocean, and bring just like a potentiality, something that you could see again like as chaos, but when integrated properly here could, I mean, I mentioned this with it's appropriate to also this week, because this week we just concluded the book of Genesis, and we move on next week to the book of Exodus. But Joseph is one of those people that has the Spirit of God rest on him, and that would be someone that could take potentiality like the dream of Pharaoh and do something with it, create something with it. Same thing is with I mentioned with Bezalel, the builder of the tabernacle, because again, you required again post also the golden calf. You have this burst of chaos of like this desire that basically wants to sort of that you could see is built into the nation, but it needs to be put in a vessel. It needs to be harnessed, and it requires someone with the Spirit of the gods, that God rests upon him, to take that kind of chaos, that kind of tohu, and build it into an actual tabernacle. So the world itself cannot handle the Leviathan, because it's too great for us to have that, which goes back to the flood, right? We can't handle, because we get overrun by that. However, which, in a certain way, God lets Abraham, Noah know that he gives them the mark of the rainbow, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like, ultimately you have to have like just the direct color is too intense. Light is too intense. If it's broken, and then you can see the multiplicity through those lights, it's reminding you that like when you see the rainbow, you're seeing a fractal version of like the actual light, because it's too much for you to handle. Because if you've seen that, if you want to be able to handle that kind of light, you're also going to be judged via that kind of light, which is like was destruction. Like it was too much for the people to handle. It required us, in a certain way, God turning his face from us is a certain way him showing his love to us, because I could then,
mm-hmm.
If you see my face, you'll die.
Yeah.
It's too intense.
You don't go out and stare at the sun. Yeah.
Exactly. You don't go out and stare at the sun. Exactly. So when we see the rainbow, it's sort of a reminder for us that we are required to see the multiplicity, because just seeing it directly, seeing it unified right now is still too intense for us.
Okay. This is really interesting. So I mean, and the hope is that there will one day be a day where we will see the direct sunlight, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they say that the righteous enjoy ziv hashchina, the glow of the Shekhinah, right? Like, or the light, the light and self, the infinity light. This is a reminder again, like, you know, the creation story repeating itself with Moses being born, the house is being filled with light. So like this light is always trying to come back and make its way into our life.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think there's somewhere in the book of Enoch where Noah was born the same way, but I could be wrong about that. That he was born in the house was full of light or something like that. I thought it said that. I could be wrong.
Enoch
Maybe
is another character, which is like, he's out there.
Sorry, did I say Enoch or did I say Noah? I meant Noah, I think. But then I think it could have been Melchizedek too. I don't know. It was one of those guys. One of those guys, they were born was full of light. This is I don't know, it's really interesting stuff to me. I'm just still not quite sure how to piece it all, I guess, together. So the Leviathan, behemoth or oxen, whale, whatever the duo is that are battling, that's trying to describe this end times thing that's supposed to happen, where the Leviathan, I guess, is properly integrated within creation so that creation can reflect and see the face of God.
So Sherry writes over here correctly, the behemoth is a giant creature of the dry land, flip side of the Leviathan. Exactly, right? So this was an example of like that being the earthly, the Leviathan being from the water, like full of potentiality, and it needs to kill the earthly, which represents in a certain way also the earthly deeds we do here, even the godly deeds, right? These are all tools, earthly tools that we are trying constantly to elevate and allow us to elevate. However, in the end times, once we could reach that kind of unity, it requires, there's a battle, right? So there's like, which is like, you could always say, I mean, in a very small version, even like the meaning crisis, these are all little battles that one is having with oneself. However, ultimately, when successful, then those things are integrated. By the way, the battle itself in the nature versus sacred, that's also because, there does need to be an integration there. You would think that like, oh, the sacred doesn't require nature, but in a certain way, the sacred itself requires nature sort of to be seen as sacred, right? If everything's sacred, then nothing's sacred in a certain perspective. So like it requires like a certain negative also to be in that battle to allow it to get to that next stage. And the meal, whether it's eating this and then being able to sort of intake the unity, or being wrapped into this clothing, which is being like, you're being covered by this unity. Both are trying to show integration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. It's just tricky for me because Sherry's in the chat too, and she normally has, I think her and Jess, when I've listened to them talk, they have a very, I guess, more so positive outlook on Leviathan. Which I think, like, I'm getting that you or maybe in the Jewish community is more accepting of that as well. For some reason, I used to always just be like, it's a snake, it's a serpent in the garden. Like, you don't mess with it, you don't toil with it, type thing. And maybe there is that as well. Like, you don't. I don't know. I'm just not quite sure.
I specifically think of the Leviathan as like a sea creature, and that's why it's separate from the garden.
I see. Okay. And so it's not. It is a sea creature, and it is associated with the sea serpent, but that doesn't mean there's a direct connection to just serpents as a category in general, I guess.
Right.
Okay. I just want to clarify that.
I see like a comment over here that Mark is mentioning.
Wait, what is this?
Which I'll entertain. I don't think the meaning crisis is the battle of that nature at all. And then he wants to know where I'm getting my meaning from. So first of all, I feel very comfortable to be loosey-goosey with that term right now because I'm a postmodernist. No, not because I'm a postmodernist. I feel comfortable being loosey-goosey with that just because I think that term carries a lot. I think when I talk about a meaning crisis, it could also relate to a confusion that specifically about religions have, which is when thinking one thing is divine and sacred, and not realizing how that needs to be integrated uh, uh, with reality here in the world and how we approach each other. So I think that is part of a crisis that happens, because one then doesn't sort of know how to relate to his scripture, to his God, if there seems to be a gap between what they're experiencing and what they're being told by clergy, rabbis, whatever, that this is how the divine perspective should be. So I was saying, I think, and due to modernity, a lot of those issues have come up, and hence why I think that's why I would say, in a small version, that's why I said that the fight with the Leviathan and the behemoth, of realizing, trying to integrate potentiality and the sacred with nature, is also something that we today are trying to battle. I hope that answers your question, but if not, not. I was thinking about today when they were reading the portion of Exodus, of Genesis. So we basically buried Jacob, and we also end up burying Joseph. But in this story, there's Jacob basically prophesies, and sometimes we see it as a blessing, but it's really just like a harsh talk to all his sons. And later on, when he dies, the brothers get very nervous because they think that Joseph's gonna be very upset about it, like what happened in the past. And ultimately, he tells him, he's like, "Dudes, chill. This is all part of God's plan. And like, you thought you guys were doing evil deeds towards me, but ultimately, like, God elevated this." And I was wondering how much of that is, if that's the right attitude, or is Jacob's attitude the right attitude? Like, is the attitude to sort of absolve them from their issues, like to sort of see it's all going to work out, like sort of in the bigger picture, or Jacob sort of taking it to the mat and going to each one of the kids and saying, like, "Listen, you're my son, but like 1, 2, 3, 4, like Simon and like Levi, like you guys, like your wrath and your, like, it was like way too intense." And like, so I still saw that was like seeing the other, but like, I don't want to say that Joseph was like, it was like a cop out, but just like that response of like, it's all divine. So it's okay that you guys threw me and sold me. And like, it's all great. I was wondering a little, like even in this little corner, if like my attitude should be more, sort of as Maimonides says, that the Christian and the Muslim, like ultimately, it's all part of God's plan, and they're letting everyone know that there's one God. So like it's sort of like a Joseph take, like it's all going to work out in the end, and like that's like what God had in plan, quote unquote, for the Jews. Or is it more of a Jacob conversation where I talk to someone like you, or I talk to someone like other people in this little corner, and there's like a love, but there's also like a calling out. There's like, well, 1, 2, 3, and I disagree about that thing. So I'm just thinking about that as like we're having this conversation.
Huh.
I don't
well,
know.
Don't ever hesitate to call me out or tell me. I part of me wants to say there's both, because you would want to, because in a way I feel like when you're calling someone out, you're almost calling them higher or something. I mean, it's all done out of love. Like I think the forgiveness that Joseph gives out is not. I mean, I think that's done out of love, but also what Jacob says is also done out of love, where you give correction out of love too, because you're trying to cut away the fruitless branches or something. You're trying to get rid of the chaff and call someone into a higher being. So I think, to me, that's where my mind would go, that you need both. But I mean, the thing with Joseph too is like he kind of has to. You have to forgive, otherwise, I mean, what do you do at that point? Then you would have no brothers, because like if he brings down the fire from heaven at that point, it just consumes his brothers. So rather, he goes beneath them to uphold them.
So there's some sages that say that when he cries like a lot. during like these like all his stories. There was a lot of crying. You can imagine the brothers all looking at each other like, again with this.
Yeah,
God, he can't control himself. So
this
like,
Egyptian.
yeah, this Egyptian. So he cries because they say, listen, they come to him like, your father, our father told us 1, 2, 3. Now we don't know if Jacob told them that or not. They could be like making up a story again. And I think there's some sages that say that when he cries, then he cries because how disappointed he is with his brothers. That like they still felt like the need to sort of lie. And then he says like, listen, don't worry, I'm gonna take care. I'm gonna finance like you guys, and I'm gonna like take care of like your kids. And he ends it with like he spoke to their hearts, or at least in Hebrew it's like he's diber lelibam, and you could say that that's a response because he read the situation, and he's like, these guys are terrified, and I am still upset, but like I'm just gonna speak to their heart. I'm just gonna like sort of control the situation, which is I'm with you that like why bring like fire and brimstone? I still want my relationship with my brothers, but ultimately, it could be like he didn't really see like the need to forgive them at that point. He just felt like I'm gonna take the high road and see like this is all part of a bigger picture. Like I'm still upset at you guys. Like it definitely wasn't cool, but like it's all good. You have this also with Esau and Jacob. Like he sees like Jacob bowing down 7 times. He's like he has like a limp after fighting the angel. They end up crying and hugging. He's like, all right, dude, like get up. You guys are like, yeah, everything's okay. There's a lot. Okay, Luke, you could join. This is a safe space, Luke.
Yeah, get in here, Luke.
God loves highly
Don't be
emotional.
scared.
David,
Don't be
Jacob,
scared.
Joseph. By the way, that is very true, Luke. That God does. I'm working. We're all. Oh no, I was going to say we're all working, but I'm not working right now.
I'm not either. Yeah.
There's a lot also about the mummification, like that happens over there, which is also very, very interesting. There's a lot of historical facts, actually, even though the Bible's not a historical book. But the fact that Jacob is on a bed, because beds didn't exist in Mesopotamia, like that is an Egyptian invention at the time, and like his legs, like when he dies, it says his legs are folded on the bed. And then earlier on, when he gives the blessing to Joseph's sons, he's on the bed. So it's just very, it's very interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Do you have any like, is there any like symbolism in that or what?
No, I think that the Bible is letting you know like this went down in Egypt.
Okay.
Like, how do you know it went down in Egypt? Because the guy was on a bed. Like these are hints, which is like this is different. The fact that he's mummified.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a huge thing going on there with like what's very interesting. He gets buried in the classic tomb, the tomb of the patriarchs. Okay. Now, and when he's talking to Joseph, he's like, listen, I got to be buried over there. Okay. You got to make me swear you're going to bury me there. Yeah. And this is like the one that, Abraham bought from Ephron, like the whole classic story. When he talks to Pharaoh, he tells Pharaoh to be buried in the tomb that I have carved out of the mountain for myself. He uses a completely different language. And that's because, for himself. And this goes back to the swearing. He is very aware that Pharaoh is not gung-ho about this idea about Joseph and his connection to his brothers, and they have like their own little God and like concept. So he is not going to just let them leave Egypt. However, because he's a king, he respects the concept of an oath. And when he hears Jacob, which is like the tribe leader of these people, says, listen, just like you have a tomb, like your massive pyramids, which you guys dig for all your life for your burial, I too have dug a tomb for myself. So power recognizes power. Like you can't take that away from me. And Pharaoh uses the same terminology. He says, I'm going to let you go get buried there like your father made you swear. So like this is all very contractual and very specific with like the words they're using. That like Jacob was very aware that if this is going to work, if I'm going to leave, there's going to have to be a swear, and there's going to have to be a story where this is like a very special burial for Pharaoh to be okay with this.
Interesting.
And there's two burials. He gets taken out with a crazy procession.
Yeah.
Right. It's like this whole thing. Then they get to the Jordan, because historically speaking, at that time, there was also battle with like the Hyksos people. So they can't go in from there. And
with
then
with the what people?
The Hyksos people. There was like people that were living in that area. They didn't control that whole area there.
I didn't know what you said. Sorry.
And then the Israelites take him. Then they bring him into Israel, and then they bury him like personally. Like there's like a small little private burial, which they actually bring him inside. Another interesting tidbit that I recognized was that when he's being mummified, it's in the same verse. It specifically mentioned the physicians and not like the wizards, or like there's no religious aspect to this, which was like very much not what the Israelites would have done. So I think again the Bible is sort of letting you know that even though he was mummified, this wasn't through, let's say, a mummification process which had to do with like pagan or idol worship. It was strictly like medical.
That's really interesting. Huh. Yeah, because you would think if he was mummified in the Egyptian sense, there would have been all that spiritual stuff attached with it. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm not sure. I feel like I'm just collecting all this information because, like you said, there's all this weird historical hints and little nuggets in there. But for some reason, those to me are, my mind always wants to go over and be like, well, what does that mean? Like, there's always some sort of weird meaning behind it. So, like, even his body being prepared, mummified, whatever. I think the word, if I remember right, the Hebrew word is like spiced or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, they also put like spices on it, but there is. So I mentioned this on a Voxer actually before the Sabbath, that there is like as far as symbolic meaning. So the mummification, and that's why Joseph says, like, listen, this is going to happen to me too. Like my dad managed to get out of this, and I managed to bury him, but I'm also going to be mummified. Make sure to take my bones out. And the reason is because Joseph also recognizes the mummification is trying to capture the present, and the Egyptians are trying to have like this eternal life. The Hebrews are not believing. They don't believe that. The idea is like, there's the Masorah. We're supposed to pass on from the next child to the next child. So we need to move on. So him mentioning them the bones, it's you need to make sure that I leave this place, and not because like I need my bones to be buried. The concept of me, the concept of Joseph, my bones, we gotta eventually get out of Egypt. Yeah. And like the mummification is not that, like that's gonna go nowhere. We're not gonna be able to capture this moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, yeah. So we're on Jacob's channel too. I'm like, you're gonna allow me to bring in some Christianity here. Is where my mind, because the spicing, the mummification process, the preservation, the spices remind me of the Queen of Sheba, which reminds me of Sabbath, Sheba, Shabbat, all those things. The spices, which reminds me of the Book of Song of Solomon, where the king is in this dance with the Shulamite, Shalom, Sabbath, whatever. So there's all the spices in Song of Solomon. So there's this weird interplay with like death, and this is what I was talking about with Nate a little bit ago, where there's this weird kind of back and forth with like death and Sabbath and Shalom and all those things going on. And then even in the story of Christ, it's like he's brought to the tomb. His bones are taken to the tomb. He's wrapped up. They spice his body. It says, like, I think Mary Magdalene the next day takes spices to go anoint him, and then his bones are gone. They're like risen or something like that. So I didn't know if, like, all that being said, there's still this weird connection that Jacob has mentioned where Jesus could have been, and I don't know how common this is, this belief or anything, that he could have been the Josephite Messiah or something like that. So there's also this other connection with the figure of Jesus and the figure of Joseph as well. I'm not sure what to do with all that. That's just where my mind is going.
Listen, the Sabbath is known as Me'ain Olam Haba, as in the Sabbath has likeness to the world to come, and the world to come is obviously like when we cease to be here. So like that is supposed to be like not a death, but life after life. And on the Sabbath, you get a neshama yetera, like there is an additional soul that you get on the Sabbath. So also these are concepts that I think potentially like resonate a little with the concept of death. Death not as a bad thing, but death as like sort of what's beyond. So those and I mentioned this. Luke was mentioning about. I think he was talking about sort of time. I forget exactly what he said. What his comment was, but I mentioned that Shabbat is sort of escaping time in the sense, and time again, which would be, life. You're feeling the ramifications of time, and obviously death is post time. But earlier in the Bible, it talks about that the sun will rise, the sun will rise and set, the moon and the stars, like it's going to be a cyclical world, velo yishbatu, and it won't stop. And that's again where you see the term of Shabbat, which is like you're going to live in a cyclical world. There's no way around that. However, we have a hack for that called the Sabbath. So like that, them saying that's part of God's gift, which is like allowing you to mentally and physically allow yourself to escape that rat race, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then feel what it would be like in the world to come. If you are no longer concerned with time, or like I mentioned, if at my Sabbath table, like don't talk about tomorrow because like we're here right now, that allows you in a certain way from a mindfulness perspective to surpass life in a certain way, because like I'm not worried about like what's coming, what's going. There is no, like I'm here.
Yeah, I'm not stuck in this constraints of time in a way.
Or in the snake.
Yeah. It makes me think of Saturn too. Saturn's with all the rings around it. The Greek mythology, Kronos. So then Zeus, I think, is Jupiter, which is like gas. So it's like this known for expansion or whatever. And it's Jupiter or Zeus that breaks apart Kronos, time. I think, right? If I remember right. Something like that.
I mean,
and it's a weird thing too, is like, and even in that story, so the Saturn is like this closed circle basically, and it ingests, I think, gosh, I don't know, it doesn't. It ingests all the other one. I'm getting the story wrong. And then Zeus comes back and fights him or something like that.
Well, Kronos eats, right? Luke. His mom together with Zeus, they trick him and they give him he thinks he's eating Zeus, he eats a stone, but the idea is also like just like Sargon of Akkad or just like Moses, like the deliverer has to come from within inside the womb, within inside the the oppressor, which is like related to him in some way, and then like break free.
Yeah. Luke called me a pagan. See, I told you I'm pagan.
Luke, I wanted to say, as far as Luke, he mentioned to us why he wasn't joining. I'm chiseling and sanding old reclaimed baseboard for my kitchen remodel. Doesn't lend to quite chatting. So that's true. I'm just going to mention because I saw you asked if I was an architect. So, Luke, I'm not an architect. I have a firm where architects, thank God, work for me. And I oversee all the architecture and all the creative and all the design. But I did not go to school for architecture. I went to school. I went to law school, but I was fortunate enough to make that change. So the work you're doing sounds fantastic. Just from hearing you speak, Luke, from our small interactions, I know you're a lot more serious than all the workers or most of the workers in Israel. So if you're ever looking to use those hands over here, I'm sure people would be very fortunate and very happy to accept such work, because Israel is lacking in craftsmen. Well, it's also because it's a very young country, so we don't have like this guy has been a carpenter for 7 generations. Israel's been around for 2 generations, so he was a tailor and his son is a carpenter. So like he's not very good.
That's funny. Yeah, my sister's actually an architect as well. There's like, I guess, a line of architects in our family, but you should get Luke over there to do his remodeling. He's always doing that stuff. He's a good guy. Oh, by the way, down here at Modus Trollins is Cal. I don't know if you've ever spoken with Cal, but you should talk to him sometime.
I've heard of Cal. I think I've seen him speak, and he reminds me. I don't know. There's someone who reminds me of when he talks. And I love his hands. He has hands that move. He's good hands.
He's good hands. Yeah, he's a fun guy. He's a lot of fun. They're both Luke and Cal's. They got a good chemistry. They're a good duo. They go back and forth. I'm in a Signal chat with them, and it's pretty fun. But he says yes to Cal.
Luke writes, Cormac McCarthy was an architect, and just because we're talking about death, Cormac has a beautiful. Where is it? Where are these little things that I said?
Could you drop the link in the chat here so Cal could join? He's texted me and he asked where the link was. If you want to meet him, he said he might come on.
Sure. 1 second. Copy. Boom, boom. Pow. Smack. I believe it should be in. And what was it that Cormac said? Okay. I'm going to post it because I think I saw Luke mention Cormac a few times. But he had this. I posted it. Evil has no alternate plan. It is simply incapable of assuming failure. I had this saved because I was going to have this conversation with about evil with Manuel. It didn't happen yet. It does need to happen. I also mentioned to him that I was like sort of a little apprehensive about having a conversation just because I didn't want to get like locked inside the conversation about evil. Hello, sir.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
I can hear you.
My audio is notoriously bad. I always sound like I'm underwater.
Well, someone
I always
sound all right.
I always look like death because I have a sleep disorder, but I'll try to hang in for
So there was something that Chezi said earlier actually that made me think about you, Cal, where we were talking about Leviathan and Behemoth, and Chezi was relating it to the sacred and creation basically, and he said that in a way the way they interplay with one another or something. Didn't you say something like this, like the sacred almost needs what's not sacred in order to become more or something like that?
Yeah, what I was saying there, I wrote this down. 1 second. Are
you gonna quote yourself?
What do you say?
So are you gonna quote yourself?
No, just as we have these conversations.
He's making a dig at me because I am notorious in our circle for quoting myself.
Cal, while I take this out, what's your story, Cal?
Well, if I may quote myself briefly, what you're about to share, what I think you're about to share, reminds me of certain thoughts that I've had about, sort of like in the Tao Te Ching, opposites interdepend, and the way that God's creator status or his fatherhood interdepends on his having sons or creatures. So, to me, that there's something to that idea. It's hard to see how God would be a creator, if he existed in utter solitude, utter transcendence. But my story is I was raised Hare Krishna. I don't know if you know who those people are.
Yeah.
Yes, I was raised Hare Krishna, hence my name is Kalia Krishna Das. In terms of Hare Krishna names. But I'm Christian starting as of maybe 5 years ago. I was an atheist for a very long time, the kind of atheist that I didn't really think God would. I didn't think I would ever believe in God. I never thought I would be Christian any more than I thought I would be Muslim. But it happened, and so that's basically, I think that's my story in a nutshell. I've gathered bits and pieces about you, but actually, no, I don't know your story except that you live in Israel, and I did hear. I thought you were an architect too, but you clarified that. So that's all I really know.
Yeah, born and raised over here in Israel. Family originally from the States. A lot of rabbis in the family.
That's amazing. What year did your family go to Israel?
It started with my grandfather, who's going to be 100 this year, which we're very exciting about.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem, nice dude. And he after the '67 war, he went to his congregation and told them, "Can you hear Mother Rachel calling?" And he said, "Like, I'm busting a move. I'm moving to Israel. This is what like modern day miracles look like. I don't know what else you guys want to see, but like as like the pulpit rabbi, I'm letting you know like that's my move." So like he like a few years later he basically moved, and then there were two brothers and a sister. They moved like within 2 years from each other. So like they all moved here, and then like my parents were the last ones. They came here in early '80s, like around '82.
Okay.
And then we were here, yeah.
So where were they before then? Were they were they ultimately Ashkenazim or Eastern European?
Ashkenazi Jews, Eastern European. So like we're Levites. So I'm hoping somewhere there's like a genuine Jew, but like I have like blue eyes and like blondish hair. So like I don't know.
Levites is like the Kohanim, right? Cohen?
Yeah.
Like that. Okay, you're right. So you guys have priestly status, or at least the option, the possibility.
It's a lot of drama because in synagogues today, so the priestly, the priests, the Kohanim, came out of the Levite tribe, and then there was a split with the Levites Aaron's sons basically continued the lines of the priests, and the Levites were dealing sort of with around the temple or around, like they would carry the tabernacle, and they were also very involved, the Levites, with teaching the Torah during when the Jews come back, and Ezra and Nehemiah reread the Torah, and the scribes, so they bring also the Levites to teach the Israelites. However, in synagogues today, when you get called up to read the Torah, the portion of the Torah, so the first verse goes to the priest. Second verse goes to, there's seven. Second goes to the Levite, and then the rest go to the Israelites in the community. And before the priests bless the congregation, the Levites wash their hands. But in my family, it's a tradition not to do that because I don't know, someone in my family was too proud, I guess, to do that or something. But it was down the line they decided not to do that. But yeah, but the priestly tribe specifically, I think over the years I've done some like some genetic testing, and there's like a specific specific code. I don't know.
Well, I heard a theory, because I mean, for reasons that are probably easy enough to understand, the Exodus narrative is difficult for some people to swallow. You know, that the Israelites moved, or the pre-Israelites moved out of Egypt with all those animals, and they were truly out there for 40 days, etc. So I heard a theory someone put forward that historically speaking, only the Levites came out of Egypt into Canaan. And his evidence was something like that you see like more Egyptian names among the Levites. He had some interesting points to make, but I did come across that theory, and that's kind of what comes into my mind when I hear about the Levites.
Yeah, so there is a theory like that. There's a theory also that the Levites were in fact part of the Egyptian class that came with Moses, together with some of the Israelites. Some say that it was just the Levites that left Egypt. It connects to some sages that say that the Levites didn't practice they weren't enslaved in Egypt. And that's because they were part of potentially this other Egyptian class. But yes, but Aaron and Moses and Gershon and other names are Egyptian names. So
there's a theory even within, or not a theory, but I mean, even within, let's say, the more fundamentalist or orthodox religious understandings, there's still this understanding that Levites are somehow more Egyptian, or they are different than the rest of the tribes.
Then I mean, it gets. You have things like the shawl, the prayer shawl that we put on, that looks very much like Egyptian prayer shawls, and even
I never realized that.
Even the phylacteries, they predate. I mean, they're very old, and if you look at the Qumran, what they found in the caves of Qumran, they found like phylacteries that clearly look very similar to my phylacteries. However, the Zohar talks about this, that the phylacteries were a technology already used by the Egyptians. Specifically, you could see the hawk and the snake when it's double, and they're supposed to signify, in Kabbalah, they signify, I think it's, I'm blanking right now what they signify, but the attitude is that this was a technology which Judaism sees as a lower form of trying to transcend, but the idea itself was worthy enough to take and like appropriate differently, and then putting in the Shema and other scrolls instead. But that is a similar idea of the sort of phylacteries that the Egyptians were using as well.
Well, that's very interesting to me. I have two reactions to that. One is that it does attest to the Exodus narrative in some way, because it suggests that, the Jews were there after all, at least some. I'm open to the idea of all of them. And that there was a real literal, his event on Sinai, and so on. I never quite know how literally to take even the New Testament. And when you get into the Old Testament with stories that become progressively more mythical, whether or not they're true myth, I never know really how literally or how physically to take them. But that there's that reaction that I have. The other thing that I have that's very interesting is how, the conventional understanding of Abrahamic religions is that they're opposed to witchcraft. But of course, if you look into Kabbalah and or even just if you just read the Bible, you see that there's let's say technology, magical technology all through it. And that's fascinating. The way that Jesus, for example, he spits into the dirt and he rubs it on the eyes of the one who he heals, and the way that rabbis have basically done magic and bound demons and cast spells and things, and they have talismans and things like that. That it's not really appreciated, but the Jewish magic is it's a big through line through both the New and Old Testament, or through the Hebrew Bible
and Christianity too.
New
You
Testament.
see, after all, there's a decree to get in the Bible it talks about getting basically rid of all wizards and all witchcraft, which was clearly prevalent at the time. However, Saul ends up going to the witch of Endor, and right, so there's that whole crazy.
Wait,
crazy
what is that? What did you say? Saul? Oh, the Saul in the Bible goes to the
So he goes to the witch of Endor, and she brings
the necromancy or something. Yeah.
Right, so that's there. I mean, so her response to him: I see a man with a coat, and he knows who it is because constantly he's wearing a coat. There's like a whole psychological level of interpretation there. But yes, I do think that technologies like that exist, so much so that we are told that when Abraham, there's gifts he gives to the concubines, and he goes east of east, and we have in our tradition. Sorry.
Oh no, I delight in the kind of the poetic ideas there, because Eden is like, it's in some way it's supposed to be like the most eastern place, right?
Right.
And the world is like a scroll, but then you can go east of east, of course. And so anyway, it's a beautiful idea.
Mikedem lekedem, from east to east, and what we learn over there is at this time, historically speaking, this is when the first Vadas are being sort of written, and the attitude was that Abraham went and discussed different technologies, like Eastern technologies. There's an attitude that the Brahma is potentially like Abraham backwards, and that's where that comes from. And now
You mean the Vedas? See,
Yeah,
now
the
you're
Vedas.
talking
Correct.
about the religion that I was raised in.
Correct. So I'm saying the attitude where our sages say that there is a cross-pollination over there with Abraham, and the attitude is that is what in Judaism is called tameh, or let's say unholy, is not necessarily seen as evil or bad, just more should be read as different frequency. So
Yeah.
that's so these other technologies, like we see with the story of Bilam that comes to curse the Israelites. You have to realize none of that story has any Israelites in them. Moses is not in them. He's not talking. We're hearing this is all a story happening in the background. And the Bible thought it's important for us to know, the readers, that, hey, Israelites out there are other people that have a relationship with God, that could talk to God, that are powerful and have their own relationships. However, as long as you maintain your orientation, you'll be protected from this. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. It's a fascinating thing to me. The idea that in the Talmud, some rabbis are for having refused the opportunity to be healed by Christians, to be healed in the name of Jesus. There is a recognition all through Judaism of the magical efficacy or the spiritual efficacy of idolaters, or what are from the Jewish perspective idolaters. And there's something analogous to that probably Christians should take seriously, and I think maybe do, but I mean, too often there's a tendency to think, well, if it's a miracle, then it's like it's from God. But I think that I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to know what to make of miracles that happen in other faiths, aside from judging them as purely satanic or purely demonic, or even the Shroud of Turin. For some reason, I think it's like supernatural, but my gut doesn't tell me that it was really lying on the face of Jesus. I think it's almost like magical. It's almost like the prayers and the intentions and the spiritual ideation of so many thousands and millions transformed it into a relic, even though historically that's not what it was. But the thing is, I don't know with the Shroud of Turin, for example, but I'm just saying, like, I have an intuition like that about it. It's like I don't know where it comes from, except that I think that the occurrence of something supernatural does not necessarily bespeak anything either way. I don't know though. See, that's the thing. I'm just
I know that there was a prominent rabbi named Rabbi Kook, and he mentioned that only the small-minded, speaking to Jews, saying only the small-minded think that God, I'm paraphrasing, but basically that God doesn't connect to the world or to the other nations via other religions. And there would be nothing wrong if the reality was that it would be clear that this other religions would have other leaders and prophets, and those prophets would be able to do miraculous acts. So the attitude is very much that, like, that is, that there is a place where that kind of game is being played. I would also say that you were saying that rabbis didn't want to take Christian healers' assistance. This also has to do with worship in general, which is Judaism, and a lot of this had to do with sort of the break with Christianity, was how it relates to Gentiles and their and them having access, to the world to come, or being finding salvation. And the attitude of the Hillel school of thought was that as long as you keep the 7 Noahide laws, then you would be able to really find salvation. And as far as Jews are concerned, as long as you recognize, as in Judaism recognizes that there is what to discuss with the stars in astrology, and there's what to discuss with different concepts such as angels and demons. However, Judaism recognizes that ultimately this all comes from one source. So, it's just playing at lower frequencies. And that's why Judaism says, as long as the idol worshiper also recognizes that all these are coming from one source, or I'll give an example, let's say, as in you could understand that there's Neptune, or you could understand that there's Aries, but you understand that it all basically comes from Zeus.
Yeah.
So
then
like
in Plotinus,
idol worship, because where it's coming from.
Yeah, like in Neoplatonism and Plotinus, it's very clear that despite being nominally pagan, they had a fairly sophisticated conception of the one, not very different, ultimately, if you ask me, from the Kabbalistic conception of the Ein Sof.
First of all, correct. There's arguments that some of Christianity potentially is like a misreading of some Kabbalic text, when you just see obviously you're only supposed to study Kabbalah when you're 40 years old, because arguably if you read it when in your teens, it seems like idol worship. It seems like something very different than what classic.
That's profound.
Or you could use it for that, right? Because that's the same thing with people, and I've heard people talk about this in witchcraft. They're like, when they start off with witchcraft, they use it for to get money, or to, so if you're going to use your technology or your Kabbalah or whatever for, like you're talking about, lower frequency things, then you're performing some type of, I guess.
Or from another angle, look at how Catholicism appears to Protestants. It looks like idolatry. But the thing is that in some way, it's the more ancient and more authentic expression of Christianity.
Yeah, this is really interesting to me. I like that you tied those together, Cal, because with the technology, the idol worship, and even tying in the name of Jesus into all that is really interesting as well.
Yeah, well, like that guy, Morton Smith, his scholarship was pretty dubious a lot of the time, but the thing is, he did write that whole book, Jesus the Magician, that was quite interesting, picking up on the way that Jesus, like many Jewish rabbis, Jewish rabbis is redundant, but I mean many rabbis, he's basically he's doing things that look to be like rituals, that look like they're leveraging technology. Even lies atop the girl when he says, Talitha Kumai, little girl, arise. It's like he's letting his breath pass from his mouth into her mouth. There's something kind of ritualistic about it. Reality is like a kind of living language almost. There's the symbolic associations behind what we, not merely incidental. Ultimately, everything is symbolism, I think.
Well, we see this in the whole saga in Egypt. Like the Egyptian high priests and wizards clearly have their own technologies that they're playing with, that Moses needs to contend with. Which is also, that whole conversation is a recognition that these things exist. So much so that, I mean, the Egyptians themselves were at the height of society and technology at that point. And there's an argument that in Hebrew it's called Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt. And there's Sinai is really discussed later on. So yes, God was interested because of a promise he made to Abraham to free these slaves. But there was a whole redemption aspect that has to do with Egypt specifically, which was, seeing if you guys are oriented properly. There's the sages talk about how the Egyptian wizards came to Pharaoh and said, "We see in the stars that there's going to be a leader born." And Pharaoh starts getting very nervous in this, and this is where he starts to, the decree to get rid of every firstborn child. Right? The attitude was like, "I'm going to get rid of this." But I always looked at that story, which is how much potential the Egyptians had, which is like they already recognized, like the Moses, they saw that kind of potential, and Pharaoh letting Moses grow up in his court is potentially another version of Pharaoh trying to say, like, okay, I recognize now that this is the person they were talking about. I'm going to try to fully incorporate it like inside. I'm going to see if I could just, have this power for myself. Ultimately, that's the decision that Moses needs to make when he goes out to see his brothers. It's not to see his Israelite brothers, but it's to define for himself who my brothers are. He goes out to see, like, am I the Levite prince and I represent the Israelites, or am I the Egyptian prince and represent the Egyptians? When he strikes the Egyptian and buries him in the sand, that's symbolic of, like, the decision I'm making. I'm ending Joseph's dream. That's over. We're not going to be able to empower the Egyptian nation via the vessel of, like, the one God. It's going to have to be burying the Egyptian in the sand and running off, ultimately stopping off at Jethro, and then the rest is history.
That's crazy. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Go away.
No, and then they're buried. Yeah. They're buried on the seashore at the end of the Exodus. It says that their bodies are seen buried on the seashore, same way as he buried them there. Yeah, this is reminding me of what we originally were talking about, though, with the incorporating the Leviathan and the ox and things like that. In our first conversation, I think it was when I was talking to you, and you said, "Yeah, we're still here. Like, Israel is still here." Like, you made that statement, I'm pretty sure. And so, like, when Cal was saying, I'm sorry, I'm just tracking back because you guys said so much. When Cal was talking about the Levites being more Egyptian, like, that would make sense because Moses was raised by Egyptians, right? So it's like, and Joseph even being an Egyptian, like, I think he takes an Egyptian wife or something like that. I could be wrong. So there's this weird way that you just related Egypt to potentiality and all these technologies, and it's God's entering into those technologies, I guess, because basically Egypt swallows up Israel, and they sit in the belly of this closed circle for a long time, and so they're in there, and then it's trying to figure out how can those technologies, I guess, be redeemed, and then ultimately they couldn't, and so there's this bursting, this new birth from the side, and so the closed circle is broken open, and then they come out, and Israel remains, and but it's weird because, like, even Cal was saying, they have somehow incorporated some of those technologies and almost redeemed them, transformed them, and given, and now those technologies are giving their glory up to God through Israel.
That's also why the Bible, which makes us look, it doesn't make the Jews look good that it ends with God also mentioning in the Exodus that you guys are going to leave with, like, many riches. Again, I don't know what the exact translation is, like, in English, but it's more than just we're here to take your gold. But some sages say they left with riches because they needed to feel like a real redemption. And if they were just going to walk out as slaves, it wouldn't have been enough. They had to feel like a physical redemption as well. I prefer the translation that they left with riches, which is they took those technologies that were relevant with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they take the riches is like Egypt's, gold and silver, those sort of things are like the way they reflect light. It's like kind of glory in a way. So they're taking the glory of Egypt and taking it with them and offering it up to God, something like that.
However, ultimately, though, again, in the prophets talking, of the future, discuss that they end up calling Egypt and Egypt my people, and the Assyrians my creation. And my people is usually a name that's only being given to the Israelites, but it's being given to the Egyptians as well, because the Zohar talks about this also, that Egypt is the closest to Israel with divinity. And it was supposed to be like a recognition of, like, how advanced they were with their understandings of theology at the time, or, like, of the transcendence. Because, Jordan Peterson, loves talking about his, like, Horus and his eye and his seeing. But that's, so there's a lot there, obviously.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah, it's interesting to me too, because this pattern, as I'm sure it repeats more than I can imagine, but it's even happens in Christianity, because that's why I made the joke earlier that I'm pagan, because I'm interested in all this other stuff, because I grew up in very charismatic circles of Christianity, and then now I look back at it now, and I'm like, a lot of this stuff is just magic, or what most people would call magic, but it's like redirected the difference is that it is, like you were talking about, acknowledging one creator. But I mean, so much of it looks very, very pagan. But it is because I think there's this way the God of Israel enters into the stranger, and then, you know, those things are redeemed. Those, or they could be redeemed. Those technologies. I don't know if you'd call it idol worship, because it's not idol worship at that point, but the idols themselves are something like offered up to God, or I don't know how you would say that exactly.
You
Well, I
know,
think. Sorry, Cal, go ahead.
oh no, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, Cal, I insist.
I'm gonna be changing the topic though, but it's just because I want to think through something. Well, but I don't want to change the topic. I'm
Do it.
I'm flagging that, you know, you were ending on the note that Judaism is what it all comes down to is the recognition that everything, well, comes from one source, but I suppose that's already reductive. But it at least involves that. Let's put it like that. I've been considering converting to Catholicism, and one thing that when I first thought about it, how it looked to me is that Catholicism is almost like Christian Judaism, in the sense that it does, and I hope I can say this without sounding reductive or dismissive, because bear in mind I'm the one who's here considering joining to Catholicism, or, you know, becoming Catholic. There is a way that, you know, like when I think of at least Orthodox Judaism, and maybe this is the difference. Maybe it's not a Christianity Judaism difference. Maybe it's a orthodoxy, conservatism, fundamentalism difference versus, I don't know exactly, just whatever's more freewheeling. But the you know, in Orthodox Judaism, there's a lot of emphasis on mitzvot, on works, and on storing up a certain kind of merit. And in Catholicism, it's like that too. There's lots of rules, there's lots of rituals, and the idea is you're storing up merit. There's something kind of transactional about it, or at least, you know, what could be taken by a neophyte, what could be understood by a neophyte in a rather transactional way. And there's also this notion of God punishing, which of course always has to be qualified. You know, like this kind of this sensitive and delicate topic of the left hand of God, because if you're too, if you will, heavy-handed in the way you treat this topic, is you make it like God has two right hands, and it's like there's a certain way where it has to be acknowledged that the left hand of God is not what God wants. You can say that He allows it versus, you know, on some level you might want to say, well, yeah, in other words, it's not what He wants. It's just something more that He allows. Except that the issue with this is God is an omnipotent and omniscient being. So for Him, the line between what He positively desires and what He just negatively allows is actually kind of blurry. You know, the way that, you know, like if you point to some tragedy that happened and say, Cal, why didn't you stop it? On some level, you know, I can plead that I'm not powerful enough. That's why I allowed it to happen. Or if it happened as an unexpected result of my intentions, I'd say, well, I didn't realize it would have happened. And, you know, then I'm pleading ignorance, basically. But in God's case, neither of those is going to work. So there's that way that what He allows is becomes in the limit sort of indistinguishable from what He positively wills, because He's all powerful and He's all knowing. But so you know, this notion, like, you know, you see it in Mary's apparitions, like, because you haven't been doing this and you've been falling into this sin and this, because this country has been falling into this sin and that sin, and the Father is, or Jesus Christ. Sorry, I don't know if I'm breaking up.
It broke up a little bit.
Mary says, yeah. So, but there's the idea that, you know, the Father is handing out punishments, or even Jesus, who normally it's like, if there's a good cop, bad cop routine within the Trinity, then Jesus is the good cop. But Mary says, my son's hand is too heavy for me to hold up. It has to come down. And of course, there's something fascinating and practical going on there, where for the Catholics, Mary is the mediator to the one who should have originally been the mediator. In other words, as Jesus sort of floats off into divinity and almost becomes the Father, Mary becomes the mediator through which you approach that high and holy Jesus. But so anyway, in Catholicism, I see a similar set of things that I do to Judaism. I see like this, a lot of technical debt, a lot of legacy code, a lot of commandments, a lot of emphasis on storing up merit, and this apparent transactionalism where that even seems to conceive of bad events as in many cases divine punishment. And I don't quite know what to make of that. When I was younger, I thought of Christianity as what it's like a kind of like almost a theological advance over Judaism, but the in the sense that it gets away from this understanding of things. But I now I've come to think that's not really quite right. And that the correct understanding of providence does recognize almost overbearing presence of God, where what he allows cannot ultimately be so much distinguished from what he purposes. And I'm also, as I consider converting to Catholicism, I'm seeing the wisdom in let's say the technical debt or the legacy code. So anyway, I'm just kind of, it's all quite interesting to me. Really, the thing that I grappled most with, that I have the hardest time understanding, is why it is that spiritual experience, which is often accompanied by, or claimed to be accompanied by miracles, and I believe a lot of the reports, why it is that there's something so subjective about it. Why does it seem to interdepend so heavily with the imagination of the experiencer? There seems to be something in the nature of ultimate or deep reality where it's heavily interdependent with the categories perceiver. Did I break up again?
Right.
You were, towards the end, but you were pretty clear.
I was trying to say.
Oh.
What was he trying to say?
Cal, come back. I don't know.
Depend to it really unaccountable and surprise on or with the perceptual and conceptual categories of the experiencer.
Okay, so I think there's two different things of here. There's the miracles, and I wanted to first take a step back with regards to the commandments specifically. There is conversation. There are a lot of commandments, and seemingly also it seems like, there could be punishments, and the Bible talks about what happens if one, there's like the high court could stone you. There's fire, which is like you drink boiling hot lead or honey, you could be hung. It gets pretty intense. Having said that, practically speaking, it was very rare that a high court would ever sentence someone to death. It was once every 70 years if something like that happened, and it was then considered like a violent courtroom. And even if it got to a state where they came to him and they said, were you aware of what you were doing? Yes. And were there witnesses that saw you? Yes. And did you aware that witnesses saw you? Yeah. Like, if he says yes to all the things, ultimately they say that he must be crazy, and they still don't kill him. So it's like very, very difficult. Like, Rabbinic Judaism really did everything it can to interpret the divine word by basically sort of in a certain way, like emptying the text from any real meaning. Like the same thing with slavery. While there's a concept of slavery, you have to take care of him. If there's only one bed, he has to sleep on the bed. If he wants to go free, like they basically made sure to that's not a reality that could actually exist. However, there is a punishment which is called karet, which is being severed, and that is between you and God. That has nothing to do with that. Doesn't anything happen physically to you, and that is considered one of the most devastating punishments, and that's being severed from the lifeline. However, one could always reconnect to the lifeline. So if one is taking it very seriously, if you're doing something and if you really recognize your connection, being severed is obviously horrible. I would only hope that we would one day be elevated to a status consciously where we could even recognize how devastating it is to be severed. Like right now, I don't even know what it feels to be severed. So hopefully I feel connected. So
this reminds me of the quotation from the Cormac McCarthy novel Blood Meridian, where the ex-priest tells the kid, he tells him about the horses and how when the whole company is asleep and the horses are grazing at night, who hears them? And the kid says no one hears them because everyone still stays asleep. And the ex-priest says, well, what about when the horses stop eating? Who hears them then? And then the kid answers correctly, every man. Every man hears the horses when they stop eating. And the ex-priest says, when you stop hearing that voice, you'll know you heard it all your life.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. No, you can go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
No, go please.
It's the Hester Panim, or like the spiritual dryness. But like when that happens, God is also somehow present by his absence because he's too infinite to not be present.
Just giving it like a practical example would be when something positive happens. If there's a positive event, you say Hatovu Ametiv. The God that creates goodness and adds more goodness basically to our life. When something bad happens, we are supposed to say Baruch Dayan Emet, blessed he the judge of truth. As in, you're not saying that it's a good thing, you're just recognizing that it's a truthful thing that happened to you. Ultimately, we're supposed to say in the Messianic times, whether someone dies or like whether it's a good thing or whether something dies, it's all going to be Hatovu Ametiv, and we will fully recognize that it's all good. Maimonides talks about how ultimately, while we see it as bad, we're just, our perception from where our standpoint is, like from where our point of context is, we're just not understanding that it's an actual blessing. However, these are all fun concepts to discuss, like in a place like this. Someone that deals with a horrible death or pain, telling him something like this could obviously upset them, and that's why I think it's very telling that when Moses in this midrash, Moses asks God to show him his glory. One of those things he wants to see is, why do the righteous suffer and why do the wicked prosper? And God takes him into the future and shows him Rabbi Akiva and shows him different things, and ultimately he shows him what's happening to the 10 martyrs, and they're being horribly tortured. And Moses asks, and the angels asks, like, this is the Torah and this is this reward? And God says, be silent or I'll destroy the world. And I think there's something very strong about that silence, which is
it's like in the book of Job too,
right?
Where God doesn't explain himself to Job.
But I think that's also the answer one sometimes needs to give to his friend that's even coming for an embrace. There isn't, it's gonna be okay. There's just silence, which is recognizing that is Baruch
the
Dayan
truthful
Emet.
Silence of God.
Correct.
Because whatever speaks in your mind, whatever is voluble, it's like sometimes it's almost demonic, or it's that, or if it's just your own internal chatter, it's that voice in you that would judge and that would call it, and it's putting a false order onto things. It's like there's like demonic volubility, and then there's truthful silence, just like God's silence. But it's also like the silence which in every moment is like creating you / sustaining you in being. Like, it reminds me of Malachi or Malachi. Try to mind my pronunciation somewhat, where they ask God, "How have you loved us?" And the answer, God's answer, appears to be that He has sustained you in being. It's like, you exist, don't you? And I mean, it's just
it resonates with Elijah. Well, first I was going to say with Aaron, when his sons die, it says Vayidom Aaron, and he was silent, right? And like he recognized, what they did, where he needs to be. There was a time for mourning, but it wasn't then. But what you were mentioning about God sustaining you, when Elijah says, God, it's not in the fire, it's in the still soft voice. And the attitude is like, that's, I mean, but ultimately that goes to your miracle question. I think the miracle question.
Excellent point. Excellent.
I think the miracle question changes with our perception and our understanding. I think we have a much higher bar for miracle today in a certain extent. And I think there's also already at Elijah, there's a recognition, which is you're going to start seeing him in the consciousness, in your understanding, in your perception, which is obviously very difficult from, and very difficult with modernity when we decide to cover one eye and how we look at the world. So back to my grandfather, him saying, listen, it was a 6-day war and we're still here. So I don't know, this to me looks like what constitutes as a miracle. So I'm going to be moving from America to Israel because I heard Mother Rachel calling.
Well, that was the fulfillment of Judah ben Samuel's prophecy too, wasn't it? Which also sort of augurs in the beginning of the Messianic period. Although the thing is, Christians need to, I think, understand that as much as Jews. That you'll see Elijah's coming. It's more sort of, I don't know. I'm still trying to get to grips with the way in which we are supposed to consider the eschaton imminent and always at hand. But did you ever read that story, Free Fruit for Young Widows by Nathan Englander? It's a beautiful, amazing, terrifying story about the 6 Days War.
What's the name of the book?
It's a short story. It's called Free Fruit for Young Widows. It's by Nathan Englander. And it just reminded me of that when you talked about the 6 Days War. But it's anyway. There's a lot here. There's a tremendous amount here. For me, it's like on some fundamental level, God is ultimate reality. Ultimate reality is what holds multiplicity together in unity.
Mm-hmm.
The desire to exclude, to negate, to reduce to finitude, recognizing that God is the same on some level is partaking in God's infinity. The desire to trivialize something and just say, oh, it's just this or just that. It's like relegating it to the edge of existence, to what existence is not. But paradoxically, existence, it sort of spans. It gains its identity from non-existence and thereby grants a kind of existence to non-existence. And existence, yeah, exactly. It has it's as Christopher Langan calls it a self-resolving paradox. It's like, it is like a burning bush. And so for me, it's like the only really inexcusable move is to consign your brothers, Jewish, Muslim, or any other kind of person, if you consign them to the borders of irrelevance, that's the one thing that you can't do. And if you can't understand, if you can't understand communion with Christ in these terms, then I don't think you understood it. And it's not about the big miracles. It is about the still small voice, and it is about, anyway.
Jason, what Cal just said right now also resonates with what we were discussing earlier, which is I was saying the difference between Joseph's attitude towards the brothers and Jacob's. And I think Jacob, when he blesses the brothers before he dies, he's seeing them where they are. Like he's really approaching them. And, Joseph's attitude is sort of almost to make them disappear. You know, like God ultimately, it doesn't matter that you guys threw me in the guys sold me and you threw me away. Like ultimately God made it okay. So he's sort of almost like erasing their deeds or their actions. Like it's a sort of irrelevant. There's a grander scheme. And I think Jacob is more approaching the person, the individual. You said about like the Muslim or the Christian. I'm thinking about it even in this conversation. My job is not to see you necessarily as it's all going to work out. We're all one. And like, but while that's true at a certain point, it really happens with engaging and sort of recognizing the other and seeing the difference. So like, I think that really resonated what you ended over there. By the way, just
that's right.
A 5-minute warning over here. I'm going to have to go in 5 minutes. Go ahead, Jason.
Oh no, you mentioned that severing that being disconnected from God, and that's all related to what Cal said and everything, being disconnected from your brother. And it's like what me and Cal mentioned this to me, and he said what's almost more fundamental than God is the mediating spirit between. And I think that's true, because that's the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, is everything we're talking about right now, being disconnected from, you're supposed to recognize the particular, like you're talking about with Jacob, you're supposed to recognize that, but then you're supposed to have, if you cut off the thing you're talking about in between, then that's cutting off God, because you're cutting off one another. And does that make sense?
What is more fundamental, not than God, because you can't get more fundamental than God, but what is more fundamental than the transcendent?
That's a good way to put it.
Or the immanent. You know, what is more fundamental than either the abstract or the specific is that principle that mediates between them and shifts perspective between them as analysis requires. It's like there's this kind of mediating spirit, because if you talk about, it's like God's over here, we're over there, and we're knowing God and God's knowing us. On some level, God is not really one term in this equation. I feel like God is you in the act of your knowing him. God is the union of you and God is more fully and more fundamental.
Yeah, I think it's all connected to the Job thing you're talking about, to the Aaron thing. Like I think it's all the same thing. That the one who sits Shiva, I think it's all the same thing. Like it's all that spirit, that severing you're talking about, and it's sorry, it was all going through my head. Go ahead. I know you got to run.
Martin Buber talks about the I thou, and he talks about the in between. And in the Mishnah, they talk about how the divine spirit, the Shekhinah, rests between two people. And the idea that you were saying about recognizing God within yourself, I think it's first, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. Well, you guys have love your neighbor. It's not really your neighbor, but love. It's the next step. It's recognizing the other is like you, and in the in between, in that recognition, then you could see. Together, you guys could basically see God, because it requires you to sort of remove yourself from yourself, see yourself in the other, recognize the divine in you, and ultimately the divine in the other, because you just made that recognition, and then you could connect. So I always say these kind of conversations are always clearly a lot more fruitful, because it allows us to do this.
Yeah. It's Jacob and Esau too, I think. That's
what
I keep saying.
The otherness is necessary for the full realization of
he wrestles
the image of God.
Mm-hmm. He wrestles with
the
God
image of God man. It's infinity. It embraces that complementarity between the self and the other, and so you need the other to be as other as it is, or as other as it can be, in order for that kind of the tension between between these two poles to exist, because infinity is generated as this kind. It exists as this kind of tension or dynamism. God exists as this interplay between God and creature, God knowing us, knowing God, knowing us, knowing God, knowing us.
Knowing Carl.
And Carl.
That's his inside joke. Someone accidentally called him Carl, and so.
I know
with
that.
The K. With the K.
Kale.
Yeah, Kale. Carl with a K. That's it.
Carl with a K.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for doing this.
Whatever. I was gonna get into slang, but it's gonna be. I know myself. It's gonna be too long.
Go ahead. Go.
I was gonna mention, because earlier you were talking about the left hand and the right hand. How in Kabbalah they discuss Judaism as Tiferet, as like the center sphere, and then you have Chesed, which is grace, as an extreme being Christianity, and justice, which is deen, being Islam, which is on the left, and both require to come back to the center or to be fused with the center again for sort of that balance.
I love this idea. Yeah.
Fascinating that Judaism sees things like that. That's fascinating. I didn't know that.
It's sad that in Judaism, I would say, it's almost like the hardcore people or sages were aware of this but didn't talk about it, and they're like courtyards were really more focused about the commandments and deeds. And there's a whole tradition that's sort of been either censored or not discussed. And like I said, like when you learn these topics at the age of 40 and it's mind-blowing, then like imagine I leave this conversation, right? And we're like, we talked about all the different depths and levels. And then I look at my kids and my community and they're like, yeah, so I can't blow my wife's brain right now about this, about like how there's like one God, but there's three. And they're like, she needs to go shopping. And my kid right now is trying to pray. If I start to explain to them like, the Vadas and this, and there's really that Abraham, like, no. So there's just like, so it's almost like it's too late. You're in it and you're in the system, and this is like the story you have.
Oh,
so,
I see. Well, but on some level, the awakening realizes that you don't have to transcend any of this particularity. That's you don't have to transcend your circumstances in that way at all. But instead, it's some kind of simple transcendence. Consisting in the realization that you don't have to transcend anything, kind of Zen nonsense.
I mean, we see this a lot here. That's why, like, Jordan Peterson for me almost was like a disturbance, because it was like, this is so much of, let's say, my homegrown wisdom that is doing miracles online for the population, but like at home, like no one's teaching it like Jordan Peterson is. And I was like, that's why. Like, why is like so there's a lot of, and I was gonna say, Jonathan Peugeot always comes out with like a new church father that apparently has like the most amazing wisdom. He's like, oh, you guys didn't know about this guy? Like, yeah, like everyone knows about this guy.
Well, that who does a good job on the Jewish side is that the guy behind Seekers of Unity. I can't remember his name.
Zevi Slavin, funny. So Zevi Slavin and I are very close friends. I was actually with him on Friday.
Oh, you know him personally?
Yeah. We're looking at a new studio for him to rent
Holy
out so
cow.
he can expand his thing. But
I think very, very highly of him. That's amazing to me. It's almost like a celebrity.
So he's the real deal. So like I witnessed him the first time a few years ago, and I was like, who is this dude? Like, this guy's like talking nonstop. He's like weaving all these different things. So I keep on watching him, and like I was having a hard time calling bullshit on the things he was saying. Like, I was like, at least the stuff that I was aware of, I'm like, this all seems legit. I ended up asking him, like, if we could meet, because he was like in Israel. So I was like, okay, we happened to be like living near each other. So we met up. I was like, listen, from what I'm understanding, it's like you must be like a single man living by yourself all day reading. And he's like, yep, that's like what I am. I'm a single man. Like, he was like living in this hut in the middle of like the woods, off of Jerusalem, and just like in a massive like backpack full of books, right? He would just like travel around Israel, finishing the book of his books, constantly switching them. And like, he is just like a wealth of knowledge. He comes from a tradition that is like, very integrated in Hasidim and Kabbalah. So there was a very good base there. He's clearly like an autodidact, but I am very much interested in his move. As much as I can, I try to support him. I don't know, like buy him like gear stuff. Like, so I'm a very big fan, and hopefully he's gonna push further. I was thinking of having him talk to Paul, even though I'm trying to think of like how productive that's gonna be.
Yeah, he's a little bit too high level, I guess. I'm wondering who would be. Vervaeke would be fantastic.
Mathieu
But
Peugeot.
He's spoken to Vervaeke many times already.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, what about
he's done dialogos together with him and that other guy with the blonde hair, that like the circling guy, and they just did a new thing about Neoplatonism with Jonathan with Vervaeke. I'm also trying to get him known over here. I'm trying to hook him up with like different universities over here. Just I was gonna have like a home mixer with like 50 people and be like, just preach, brother. Like, say your thing. But he's the real deal, I think.
Yeah. I think so too. I don't have as much time to watch this stuff as I wish I could, but he definitely he's really at the forefront as far as these seekers of unity go. He's really doing a terrific job.
If you would like to have like a talk with him, like let me know. I'm glad to.
Oh man, jeez, I would be out of my depth.
I've heard you speak. I don't think you're gonna be out of your depth. And like also like go. He's such a kind educator where like he will move you where you guys are comfortable.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I also have to make sure to talk to people in the morning because I don't really have enough gas in the tank to really do deep philosophical discussion anytime after the morning. But goodness,
think about it.
But
I will think about it because
that might work out better though. Because is he 6 hour difference, right? Is he the same time zone as you?
7 hour difference. So
Something
right
like
now
that.
it's like 10:30.
Yeah. So morning for you would be afternoon for him. So
he doesn't have like a day job, so like I think like he seeks. That's what he does.
Yeah.
So I think he's fairly flexible.
I'm trying to trap you, Cal. I'm not giving you any excuses here.
I'm down with
I'm just
it.
kidding.
I would definitely talk to Zevi for sure, 100%. I'm down with it. Yeah.
I'd love to see that.
It's conversations with him are always like it's funny because he comes like sometimes for a Shabbat meal, but like I have to have like the right crowd. You know what I mean? Like if someone's talking about like the Kardashians, like I'm like I can't have Zevi there. Like it's not like we can't be talking about this. So I have to find the right congregation.
Just keep trying to turn it. Just keep putting a spiritual spin on it, like relating the two harlot sisters from Ezekiel. If someone talks about it,
exactly. Like
what
what
this
does
is
her
just
body
like
mean? It actually means. On that note, gentlemen, have a good
night.
All
right, I'll see you later.
And Jason, you'll end this, right?
Yeah, I can do it. End broadcast. Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. See you guys. See you, Cal.
All right, see you.